It's very good. I haven't finished yet, but I wanted to admit that when we booked you and we got the book, there was something in me that got a little nervous because whenever I read legal Supreme Court law things, I feel it's stupid. I don't know. It becomes like the Charlie Brown thing where you're like, womp, 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 womp. But I very much appreciate your style of writing because it makes it accessible to those of us that don't have a law degree. And I feel like that was purposeful and important. And before we get into some of the more hard-hitting questions, but maybe talk to us about how it came to be that you wanted to write this.
So I think the book is in some ways the product of my long-running battle with the Supreme Court, my own feelings about the Supreme Court. So I clerked at the court about 15 years ago when they heard the constitutional challenge to the Affordable Care Act, and they almost blew up the entire Affordable Care Act based on their absolutely bogus theory that one day the government might try to force you to buy or even eat broccoli. And the idea that that was the real threat, rather than people not having health insurance and dying because they couldn't afford medical treatment or going bankrupt trying to save themselves and their loved ones, was so rattling and wild to me that I felt like I thought, oh my gosh, this institution is really messed up. People don't necessarily realize it. It felt like more people got clued in to just how wild the Supreme Court was when they overruled Roe versus Wade. But even then, I think people's focus has shifted away from the Supreme Court, with some people now thinking the court is going to save us from Donald Trump and Trumpism. They are the heroes. And I just want people to have a more complex picture of the Supreme Court and how it got to be where it is and what we should worry they might do next if we do indeed take our eyes off the court. So that's where the book came from, and it is intended for a general audience. I'm so glad to hear you found it accessible, because I think one important step in doing something about the Supreme Court is having more people informed about the Supreme Court. Like, a majority of voters can't name a justice.
Absolutely. And you're right. I think for a lot of us, certainly for me, you almost took it for granted that the Supreme Court is going to protect us. The Supreme Court is the final stop. You know, I used to think naively that once you were given a right, you can't have it taken away, for example. And as we were chatting about briefly before we started recording, there is just this onslaught all the time, constantly, of this is getting challenged. This has been put on pause. Wait a minute, it's been reversed. This federal court going back. It's stopped for now. And I find, just to use the word accessible, very inaccessible, even just in the standard reporting, which you think would be designed to reach as many people as possible. But instead, just everything just feels so complicated, which adds to the terror that I feel all the time because I don't quite understand what is actually happening.
It seems to me that conservatives were much quicker to understand that this is a political tool. We can cultivate people who will do what we want, make them feel like superheroes, insulate them from all of the people they're affecting. But on the liberal side, everyone kept believing like, no, they're impartial. They're just reading the text. I feel like it went that way with Obama nominating Merrick Garland and trying to smooth the divide. And the other side for decades was like, no, we've got this Federalist Society. The entire point is to get them to do what we want. Now that they have such a head start, is there any chance of the left having a Federalist Society of its own, or a whatever it would be called, the woke society? You know, like, can we, is it too far gone?
So I think there's a lot of work to do on the left to take back the courts. I think the conservative legal movement strategy paid dividends over the course of basically 5 decades, and it wasn't a straight line. They had some setbacks along the way, but they stayed committed, even as they were screaming about how the left was politicizing the court and the court was full of judicial activists. They were busy building a political case for taking over the court and trying to find judges who would fulfill their political ideology. The left's response has been just to defend the institution as an institution without thinking about what they are actually doing, which seems like an utter shell game and mistake at this point, given how corrupted the court has become and how captured the court is. As for a Federalist Society of the left, I think there are some parts of the conservative legal movement that progressives and Democrats should seek to emulate, like making the court part of politics and building a case for voters to care about the court over the long term. That's necessary. I'm not sure we need a Federalist Society or could have a Federalist Society in the same way. And that's in part because we're not trying to do weird ass shit that a majority of the country doesn't like. And part of why the Federalist Society was needed was to have some affirmation for when the justices did weird things, and that isn't really needed here.
I do want to kind of bridge this to another question I had, because one thing that I really liked about your book is that I knew going in that I agreed with it or most of it, but there were still a lot of details that kind of blew my mind to read about. And on one of the first pages, there's a detail about Samuel Alito's dissent in the Obergefell case, which made same-sex marriage the law of the land. And it kind of blew my mind that he wrote it in there because it is not a legal argument and it is a bad argument. Can you go through that real quick?
Yeah, so part of why I put it in the introduction is I wanted to hit people in the face with just how much they are grounding the law on vibes, like their personal feelings, and this idea of conservative grievance, that like they are the real victims no matter what is happening. So this dissent says marriage equality, the court's Obergefell decision, facilitates the marginalization of Americans with traditional views about marriage and even recalls the harsh treatment of gays and lesbians in the past, which some might think about turnabout as fair play. So he is equating the fact that gay people can get married with the persecution and criminalization of sexuality and sexual orientation throughout the 1900s and early 2000s. Like, he is saying the way that opponents of marriage equality feel today and are treated today is the same, on the same plane as when you could be thrown in jail for being intimate with a person of the same sex. Totally same in his mind.
And it is truly just that kind of logic, this grievance logic. Yeah, we are seeing that applied across the board to things. It's essentially that, in essence, that's the way that they are approaching so much of this.
How much do you think that is a actual belief and personal grievance that he has? Like, is it like, oh, he actually thinks that like these are the same thing, or is it more just this sort of like language he's using? Like, right, it's like, well, I need to make a case. I need to say something because I hate this and don't want it to happen. So they're sort of like creating these ideas after the fact.
I think it is a both and situation. I think it is a rhetorical strategy where, of course, it is easier to whip people into a frenzy and get them really mad and agitate them to like go do what you want them to do if they feel attacked and if they feel like there is an enemy. On the other hand, I really do think he believes this. I mean, he has said it in so many different ways, in so many different fora, in oral arguments, in speeches, in the pages of U.S. reports. And I just think if you say it that much and you keep coming back to it, you probably believe some part of it is true.
Yeah, it's not just, that it's effective.
You really want to believe that these people just live and breathe the law and are steeped in legal theory for decades, but they're steeped in like weird theories that are fringe theories, as you call them, and like just the Fox News alternate universe. Like it's like the inside of a Jiffy Lube where it's just Fox News on 24 hours a day in their minds. It's at least for a couple of them.
Sure, there's that. And then there is the obvious problem of bribes and them being in the pocket of people
the bribes.
that are, giving them fancy trips and fancy gifts and, funding their projects, and would think that would be utterly delegitimizing. But we seem to have just blown right past that culturally and have just rolled over and given up.
Yeah, we ignored that.
And it presumably is continuing to happen, but that has to have some sort of an element of the as to why they're jumping through so many hoops.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is another example where